Hello, everybody. This is our last week for the semester officially, as you are going to be preparing yourselves for your finals, which the finals will be held. I will be opening it up on the 24th at midnight, and it will be remain open until Saturday, the 25th at 11:59. So that's a 48-hour period that'll be open. So please, by all means, make sure that you take it because there are no makeups for the final. So I want y'all to have every opportunity, and that's why I've extended and made it a 48-hour window rather than a 24-hour window. Of course, it'll be a 100 question exam like usual, 3 hours once you start. And it's going to be covering more chapters than what you've been accustomed to in the first two exams. It'll be covering chapters 12 through 15. So that's a total of 4 chapters. What I'm going to give you today is pretty much an outline of things I want y'all to be looking at and kind of reviewing and studying. Along with this, I am going to also, like always, set up a practice test for you to do. The practice test you'll get 2 attempts for, and it'll be for this week. So please make sure you take every advantage and do that for yourselves. And excuse me. Once that's done, it'll be closing at 11:59 on the 23rd. So make sure you give yourself every opportunity to practice as much as you can. If anyone is having any difficulties or problems or foresee that they're going to have any issues in terms of taking the exam, you need to let me know as soon as possible so that we can try to create some other type of arrangements. Grades will be posted on the 4th, so make sure that you get that in. And just a state of warning, please don't request for any kind of extra credit. I'm not giving it. I've given out extra credit enough during the semester to help shore people up. Just make sure you do the reading, read the chapters fully, kind of go along with what I'm providing you in areas that you should be looking at because there are definitely going to be questions, and do your best. That's the most I can say. So let me go ahead and get started with what I want y'all to take a look at. For chapter 12, know what James Lang theories on emotion is, have a good understanding about it. Also, take a look at the brain structures and the autonomic nervous systems and how it relates to the emotions. You want to know how the decision-making process happens with emotions. You kind of want to be able to define emotions in terms of one's subjective experiences, how it would be with objective experiences, as well as the type of qualities that will come from our emotions. Try to make sure you can understand how to interpret emotional expressions, like, you know what I'm saying, and what the methodology has been for the 6 facial expressions. That's been a study that was done in terms of it. I want you to know what the study is, the name of it, and be able to explain it if you have to, because some questions might ask that. You also want to have an idea about the spontaneous type of facial expressions, as well as the meanings that come behind it. And then finally, make sure you know Hogan's experiment on emotions. Understand empathy, know the definition, know the reasons, as well as the therapeutic process in terms of understanding empathy. You also want to take a look at the relationship between motivation and emotions. You want to make sure you review Lazarus appraisal, hassles, and stress. What type of conflicts are attributed to stress? Know what type of physical ailments it goes along and correlates with stress. Hans Selye's general adaptation syndrome, you want to kind of have a good understanding about that, as well as the immune system in terms of stress and how the brain is influenced and impacted by it. You also want to have the demographic factors that goes along with stress. Finally, in chapter 12, you're looking at the environmental variables that correlates with stress. You want to look at resilience and depression. You're also going to take a look at stress due to one's personal space evasion, particularly right now. They're just practicing social distancing. So you want to kind of have a good understanding about how that can impact a person when someone steps into one's personal space. You want to know about acculturative stress as well as good health habits that we should be practicing to alleviate stress. And how do we go beyond it? All right, so chapter 13, we're looking at abnormal behaviors at this point. And in this chapter, you're going to be looking at the pro-social and antisocial behaviors. Understand academic dishonesty as well as ethical reasoning in terms of Kohlberg's moral reasoning. You want to also know the prisoner's dilemma. You want to know how cooperation is included in terms of how one may be pro-social or antisocial. Understand the bystander apathy as well as what is social loafing, and then be able to understand and talk about or be able to discuss within your questions aggressive behaviors and what's the research behind it. Other areas you're going to want to make sure you have some good understanding about is within social perception and cognition. Know what the primacy effect is and what it's for. Understand what the implicit association test is and what it's going to be measuring. You want to know how it is that we can overcome prejudice. Look at what Kalat discussed in the textbook in terms of different techniques and ways to overcome prejudice. You want to know the three main influences in regards to one's attributions. What is the actor-observer effect, as well as know what the attribution error is. And then be able to have an understanding about cultural differences in terms of attributions and how our culture impacts how our attributes are developed. In terms of our attitudes and persuasion, know how it's measured as far as how do we measure attitudes in the first place. Be able to define what cognitive dissonance is. You want to look at the peripheral as well as central routes of persuasion. What's the techniques that we use to persuade someone? As well as being able to distinguish between effective and ineffective messaging in terms of our fears. All right, continuing on, you're also going to want to be aware about the interpersonal interactions, that being the theoretical perspective on physical attractiveness. What are those components? You want to know the factors involved with developing platonic and romantic relationships. What's the difference between compassionate love to passionate love? Interpersonal influences, you now want to make sure you have a good understanding about Asher's experiment on conformity, as well as cultural differences that would be in regards to conformity. Knowles-Bartow's prison experiment, have a good understanding about the Milgram's experiment on obedience, as well as concepts on group polarization and groupthink. Now, in terms of chapter 14, here this is about personality. So yes, you need to know those theoretical approaches, that of Freud's psychoanalytics approach, Jung's analytical approach, where he's talking about the collective unconscious, Adler's individual approach, and here you know that's about the inferiority and versus superiority. You want to look at the learning approach, as well as have an understanding about the humanistic approaches, that being of Rogers and unconditional positive regard, and Maslow's hierarchy for self-actualization. Then you need to make sure you have a good understanding about the personality traits, being able to distinguish between nomothetic as well as idiographic approaches. You want to know the concepts behind self-esteem. What are those big five personality factors? Have understanding about heredity, age, culture, as well as cohort in terms of how our personality develops. In regards to the personality assessment, make sure you have a good understanding about some of the advantages as well as disadvantages, just people how they self-report. You want to know what type of objective personality tests there are, what's the pros and cons to these tests. Know what the projective type of personality tests are present, as well as the pros and cons. Have an understanding about problems that can arise within a personality test that often leads to misdiagnosis. And then also have an understanding about criminal profiling. Now in chapter 15, this is about abnormal behavior, so you make sure you have an understanding about the definition of what is mental illness, kind of understand what makes the biopsychosocial model, and just to give a hint, there's 3 different components to the biopsychosocial model. You want to also have an understanding about those cultural influences in terms of mental illness, and know what the DSM-5 is, and have a little understanding about its history and how it came to be, and how is it in terms of categorizing. Then start having understanding about some of the different disorders. First batch I'm going to tell you about, you want to know those anxiety and OCD psychological disorders. That being, what is it about generalized anxiety disorder? Know about phobias, the type of phobias. You want to know how phobias are treated as far as with learning perspective and classical conditioning. Be able to discuss what OCD is, as well as how do we treat those phobias as well as OCD. Now, substance-related disorders, be able to define what is an addiction or what substance dependence is. Be able to give some reasoning behind why a person becomes addicted. Know how to identify at-risk youth that might be a risk for addiction, as well as treatment protocols that will be used for alcohol or opioid addictions. You're then going to look at mood disorders, schizophrenia, and autism. Here you want to know the symptomology of all of them, okay? But you want to also, specifically speaking in terms of major depression, know the advantages and disadvantages and treatment options, looking at how major depression is going to be different from the bipolar disorders. In terms of schizophrenia, again, you want to know the different types of symptoms, that being positive or negative. Understand the genetic basis in regards to schizophrenia, and as well as know what the neurodevelopmental hypothesis is. Treatment modalities that's utilized for schizophrenia, and then be able to know the aspects to autistic spectrum disorder, that being the levels, knowing what the continuum means, understanding what it used to be and what it is now. Finally, treatment of mental disorders. You want to know the different types of psychotherapy that's utilized. Have a good understanding about effectiveness of psychotherapy based on research. What are some of those cost-effective ways that psychotherapy can be provided? How do we avoid getting a psychological disorder? And then know what is the insanity defense, as well as other type of societal issues that are in regards to mental illness, such as stigmas. That wraps up those chapters, and I would love to go through them again as far as explaining everything, but there are video lectures available to you already in which I touched upon a lot of this information. But it's really important for you to also do the reading, because so much information are found in those chapters. I only touch upon them. I could not give you every single item. But if you do the reading, you find that you get stuck somewhere, don't hesitate to send me a question prior to the exam day. I will not answer any questions that Friday. So if you have questions, feel free to ask. If you need to set up a conference, I'll be doing a conference this week between Monday and Thursday from 3 to 5 o'clock. If you would like to set up an appointment, please do so. Let me know which day and what time, If that time slot is available, I'll set up a conference and send you those instructions on how to access it. And more or less, I think that's it. I think that's all I wanted to stress to you. Again, just as a reminder, there'll be practice exams set up for you where you'll have 2 attempts to work with it. Understand again that it doesn't necessarily mean that the questions that you're getting in the practice exams are going to definitely be in the questions of the final, because I have a vast test bank that I use. So sometimes you look up and get the same questions, sometimes you won't. You might see a totally different exam. So that means get to know your material. That's the main thing. Give yourself, good times. You have till Friday. And don't wait to the last minute. Which reminds me, in terms of the exam, just a reminder, please be sure of your responses prior to clicking next or the submission, because you will not be able to return to a previous question. You're also going to not want to wait to the last minute, that being, do not wait till 11 p.m. on Saturday to take the exam unless you only want an hour to take the test, because it will close at 11:59. With that being said, miss all of you guys. Hate that we haven't been able to see one another. But if, like I said, you need to speak with me, I'll be happy to set up a conference call with you. On that note, I hope that y'all are safe and that y'all taking care. And it has been a pleasure. So, ta-ta.